Welcome to Queer as Pop, the podcast where we discuss all things queer, from pop culture to top headlines. I'm Matty, and today we're going to focus on LGBTQIA+ representation in sports. For that reason, I brought with me some amazing guests. We have Donavan Barrett, who is a martial artist and flexibility coach. He hosts a YouTube channel where he talks about his life and workout routines. He's also the creator of Donovan'sDojang.com, where people can purchase courses on flexibility and martial art techniques. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
And next we have a returning champion, Janae Marie Kroc, a world record-breaking powerlifter, former Marine, who made headlines a few years ago when she came out as trans. She was also featured in the 2017 documentary Transformer. Since then, she's become one of the most admirable and prominent advocates for the trans community. Thank you so much for coming back.
Thanks so much for having me on again.
Before we do anything else, I'd like us to start off with Hot Topics, our segment where we discuss news and headlines surrounding the LGBTQ+ community. First up is the anti-trans bill in the state of Missouri that would designate school athletic teams based on biological sex. A clip went viral a few weeks ago where a father of a transgender girl made a moving plea to Missouri lawmakers to reject that bill. So, Janae, I'd like to start with asking you, as someone who spent most of your life as an athlete, what do you make out of this?
Well, first of all, for anyone who saw the recording of the father speaking, it was extremely moving. And I think that what was important to note in there, this is someone that was traditionally conservative and did not hold a lot of these views prior to his own daughter coming out. And but you can really hear the pain and the care and the love in his voice as he talks about these issues and everything his daughter's gone through. And I just think a lot of people aren't aware of, the reality of what this means. We hear constantly over and over again, this misgendering and misinformation and this idea that, biological men and women's sports and, trying to make it sound as if it's just as simple as some boy walking in the girls' locker room and jumping on the girls' team, when in reality, it's nothing like that. Transgender girls are, very, very different from, quote unquote, biological males. And, just saying that, obviously there's intent behind it. There's a reason why they're portraying it that way. And, but yeah, with this father, talking about everything and how important it is to his child to be part of these teams and part of these athletics and be able to experience all of these things. And it goes much beyond all the politics of it. And this is something that really affects people's lives. And, and then we can get into talking more later about, the fairness aspect of it and the science behind it and all of that. But this is a very human story. And if you listen to the father speak, you can hear that in his voice and everything he's talking about.
Yeah, it's pretty concerning that they're perpetuating these obvious misconceptions surrounding transgender athletes and potentially damaging these kids and their ambitions and future potential. It's insane. Donovan, may I ask if you have any thoughts about this?
I mean, I think, well, one, I would mainly refer to Janae on this because they have more experience and more personal knowledge about this topic. However, in my, coming from where I come from and just seeing the world the way that I see it, I think that disincluding people has never been the recipe for success. And I think history has shown that. And it's a topic that I've always been interested in because sports is kind of where, I guess you really have to figure out how to create that space, because I think the answer is always to create that space where everyone can feel included. And I would actually be interested in learning the science behind like how that works, because like Janae said, a trans woman is not the same as a quote, by a biological male. So to, you put, and I mean, even if you just put, that's why we have weight classes. If you just put two completely cis women together, you're going to have two very different women, and same for men and every other thing. So I think, the easiest answer to me would be to keep things simple as they are and to go by weight class. And if someone's in a certain weight class, regardless of, gender, there may be something there, but I can admittedly say I don't know all the answers and I don't have the answer, but I know that the answer is not disincluding trans people.
Yeah, we've actually discussed previously the difference in performance levels, and Janae, you have, if anyone, great knowledge regarding this topic. Do we
Hmm.
know what the technical difference in performance is for trans men and women who have received hormone therapy?
Yeah, well, one study, I mean, I'll be the first to admit we need more studies and greater numbers and more people included in these, but the studies we do have, so most of them have been based around middle distance runners. And in middle distance running, there's about 11 to 12% difference in average performance between males and females. And what we've seen consistently with these athletes is that after being on female hormones, being on estrogen and or a combination of progesterone, for at least 1 year and having their testosterone levels either suppressed or if they've had gender reassignment surgery and no longer produce sufficient testosterone, and for at least a 1 year period, that the performance decreases about 11 to 12%. And so, like, let's say they were in the 80th percentile as a male runner, they after a year of hormone therapy, they're going to be about in the 80th percentile of the female runners. Their performance is going to decrease accordingly. Now, granted, that's just one area of sports, but those are the greatest numbers we have in the studies, and it's been very consistent. And there's lots of other things I can point to too. The fact that trans women have been allowed to compete in the Olympics since 2004. I mean, we're going back, that's so 17 years, and there has yet to be one single trans woman that has medaled. No records have been broken. There's not even an out trans woman that has made an Olympic team, and many have tried. And so, in 2004, when this happened, it was cry went out, oh my God, this is the end of women's sports, quote unquote, real women will no longer be able to compete, blah, blah, blah. Same thing in 2011 when the NCAA changed their rules. And since that time, we've had one Division II national champion in the 400-meter hurdles, no other in any events in any other sports in the NCAA. And but the same thing, we heard this is the end of women's sports. It's all over. We hear it again now because it's being brought to the forefront. But that is just, it isn't the case. That's not what's happened. It's not what the science says. And interestingly, I think it's very interesting and important to point out that a lot of the arguments that are being used, like you hear bone density brought up and stuff like that. Well, males have greater bone density and it's not fair. That gives them an advantage. This is the same argument that was used to keep sports segregated because people of African descent have greater bone density than Caucasian people. But it was the same argument that was used that as a reason to keep sports segregated. And I don't think that's a coincidence that we're seeing that. Basically, there's people that don't want this to happen and they're looking for anything they can. And that's why it makes it easy to use the term biological male. Then when people think about that, they're thinking of your average male athlete, throwing on a dress or putting on some makeup, and then all of a sudden they're on the women's team. Well, that's not what happens. And that's obviously not how the majority of trans women appear, how their bodies function, or anything like that. I think the easiest way to explain to people that have doubts or don't understand like the powerful effects that hormones have, everyone's familiar with sports and anabolic steroids, which are essentially male hormones. Every anabolic steroid ever created is based on testosterone. No one denies that if someone was to take steroids for a year straight, taking anabolics, that it would affect their athletic performance in a positive way. They're going to gain more muscle mass. Their body fat's going to go down. They're going to be stronger, faster, and basically a better athlete in every way. And I don't think there's anyone out there that denies that. But so estrogen basically has the exact opposite on the body as far as athletic performance goes. It causes a decrease in muscle mass. It causes an increase in body fat percentage. And it does, in contrary to what's been spread throughout the media, it does also cause a decrease in bone mass. So bone density does decrease over time in trans women, but it takes a lot longer. It can take up to 10 years to where it completely normalizes. But still, I would argue that that's a factor that does not affect athletes significantly and doesn't even matter. It's just something thrown out there as a way to, create an argument against trans women being able to compete fairly. I mean, when have you ever turned on ESPN and heard them talking about, oh my God, did you see LeBron's bone density? It's a ridiculous argument. It has very little to do with athletic performance. And if anything, in weight class sports, having more bone density and heavier bones is actually going to work against you because that's less mass you have to actually move your body. It's basically like carrying dead weight. So the idea that bone mass is something significant that helps in sports is completely absurd. But yeah, I think that's an easy way to help people understand. If you know the effect that more male hormone has on a body, and you understand that, and you would never argue that that doesn't have an effect. how can you argue that female hormone, that estrogen, which has the exact opposite effects, isn't, after a year straight of doing this and suppressing testosterone, both of them need to happen together, but that's not going to create a significant difference in that athlete. And it does, and it has. And that's why we have not seen trans women taking over women's sports. I think one of the things that drives me the most crazy is hearing over and over again about, trans women are smashing all these world records and doing this and that and having all this success. And that's simply not true. But if you Google trans women in sports, you'll see all these articles that come up. And what they don't mention is that if there was a record, a quote unquote world record broken by a trans woman, it was in some tiny organization that was not a true world-class organization. The actual record, the numbers they set were nowhere near close to the actual world records. Or it was set like in a master's division. The only we've seen is a few trans women set records in the women's master's division, not the open division competing against the best women, but in older divisions like 40 to, the 40 to 50-year-old age groups and things like that. And Laurel Hubbard, the Olympic weightlifter from New Zealand, is a perfect example. So she won the Masters Women's World Championships. But when they throw articles online, they don't. Master is completely eliminated. They say world champion over and over again. And then she won a couple meets like the Australian Championships and the Pacific Games. Well, they don't tell you that those aren't highly competitive competitions in the weightlifting world. When she competed most recently at the Open Women's World Championships, she took 6th. And that was actually much higher than she was even expected to place. A lot of coaches felt she wouldn't even make the top 10. But if you look at anything about her online in these articles, you would think that she's destroying all the other women and that no one has a chance against her. But that's how these stories are twisted and manipulated and presented. And then, so for people who don't do any more research or only see this on the surface and really don't understand the topic, they would assume that, all these women's, that these trans women are taking over women's sports, but that's simply not the truth. There is not one single trans woman in any sport across the entire globe that has broke a record or set times faster, thrown farther, whatever it is, has exceeded the best cis female athletes. And actually, there's nowhere that they're even close. So that's just the reality of it. And, if these hormones didn't have the effects and the HRT didn't change people's bodies as much as it does, then obviously we would see a lot more success by trans women, but we simply aren't seeing that.
Yeah, this is great. This is what people need to hear. And sadly, we do see a lot of misinformation being spread and these topics becoming heavily politicized.
Exactly.
And speaking on spreading misinformation, next up is the famous trans YouTuber Blair White, who is known for actively engaging in transphobic rhetoric and making fun of trans individuals. That I hate this term, do not pass, according to her. She recently became a victim of transphobia when she joined a conservative panel and was told that the best thing she could do is grow a mustache and tell people not to engage in her lifestyle. So, Janae, I know you have a history with her. Could you tell us what happened when you became a target by her and what was your reaction seeing this happening to her?
Yeah, so what happened was several months ago, Blair used me as a topic of one of her videos, and she never contacted me ahead of time. I had no idea that was going on. And I only found out when my social media started getting flooded with first hateful messages from random people who did not follow me. And then in my DMs, a lot of my supporters telling me that Blair White had created a video and focused on me as the main topic. It was about trans athletes. Well, what she had done was, I'm very muscular. I'm a former, all-time world record holder and world champion in the men's division of powerlifting. And so, I'm good clickbait, right? Throw my images up there, used images from prior to my transition where I'm super muscular, have my shirt off. And even post-transition, I'm still quite muscular, nowhere near as much as I was. But like I said, throw my image in a thumbnail, which she did use. She used an image of me in her thumbnail for the video. And the title was extremely misleading as well. It had a quote saying, I belong in women's sports, get over it, and with my picture associated with it. Now, anyone who sees that is going to think that's something I said. Well, I have been very clear from the start. I have never competed in women's sports. I have no intention to, and I certainly have no intentions of trying to break world records and things like that. But if you were to watch this video, it very much gave the opposite idea. And also, she went as far as to say that I have competed in women's sports. And the thing is, the stuff she took from my Instagram page, some of the photos and stuff she took from my Instagram page on one of the posts that she copy and pasted, it literally had in the paragraph there me talking about how I have never competed in women's sports and have no intentions to. So it would appear, I mean, honestly, I don't know what's in Blair's heart, and I can't say with 100% certainty exactly what she was thinking, but it would appear that it was malicious and that she purposely ignored information that was readily available to her and portrayed a false narrative concerning me. Um, Unfortunately for her, and fortunately for me, there were enough people who recognized me, knew who I was, and knew that I was not competing as a woman. And so she got called out on it, and it caused a lot of controversy. A number of other popular YouTubers made videos talking about all this. A few of them had me on their shows, and it ended up resulting in, last time I checked, I think she lost over 70,000 followers, due to that. But unfortunately, she's had a long history of misrepresenting trans people, saying things that aren't true, and obviously focusing on all the negatives and furthering, the rhetoric of transphobia, talking about trans women as being sexual predators, which is simply not true and never has been, and things of that nature. So that, that's my history with her. And she did finally reach out to me, like, I think it was like a month and a half later. I mean, immediately when I found out about it, we had tried to contact her. My manager and agent reached out to her. I reached out to her. We contacted her on every platform we could. We got no response, but I think after there was enough backlash, like a month or so later, she finally got back to me and apologized. And she posted an official apology on Twitter, which was weird because the video was made on YouTube. And eventually she took the video down. But yeah, so that's my background with her, and I'll honestly say, like, I don't have any hard feelings over it. I was very disappointed in what she did, and I was thankful for the apology, but I don't harbor feelings about that. It's just I was really hopeful that that would help her to kind of see the light and make some changes, and stop portraying the trans community the way she does. But from what I've seen, it really hasn't changed a whole lot. And then in regard to her, facing transphobia on this forum, and to be honest, it was hard to watch the video. I mean, the other lady that was on with her was very brutal, very insulting, very demeaning, and Blair really didn't say a word. I mean, she didn't, really stand up for herself very much. It was difficult to watch. It was painful. I mean, I did feel some remorse for her as far as what she had to deal with, but then I also felt at the same time, unfortunately, what she has done with her YouTube channel and her social media in general, she's furthered this narrative that she was being attacked with. So she has helped give a voice to people exactly like this woman that was attacking to her. So I don't know if that was immediately apparent to her, but I hope afterwards when she reflect on it, she realizes the harm that the stuff she's been posting causes, and that women like this that were saying all these nasty transphobic things, she's helping give them a platform, and she's reinforcing these myths and these lies about trans people that this woman is perpetuating. So, in the end, like I said, I just hope again that this helps Blair kind of see the error of her ways and hopefully make some changes.
Yeah, that whole session was extremely painful to watch, and hopefully Blair White will have learned something coming out of it. Donovan, I'm gonna turn my attention to you for a second. I have to say, it's a work of art watching your videos, and after discovering you, I checked your social media platforms, and the way you utilize it as a young adult is very admirable. Sharing your story, being true to yourself, and urging people to do the same. And to quote you, if your happiness stems from other people's validation or outside sources, then your happiness is not sustainable. And that is such a great quote for people going through challenges in regards to their own self esteem. Was there a point in your life when people's perception of you started affecting you in a negative way?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. And going off of what you were talking about with Janae, which, by the way, I followed that situation closely. I saw all the videos and everything. And it just goes back to, I think Blair is a perfect example of someone who I feel really sorry for and who speaks about that, about that quote that you just said from my video, because the way I see it is I feel so sorry that she feels so hurt inside herself that she's basing her whole career off of appeasing the people who probably, and I don't want to speculate, but who are similar to people who bullied her when she was younger and everything like that. And she feels this need to be accepted where she basically has to crap on the people who are in her own community who actually do have somewhat of an understanding of the struggle. And, I went through a similar thing when I first came out. I came out when I was 17. I was a senior in high school. And at first, like, all I wanted was to still be to still keep the life that I had as quote a false straight male. And I just really wanted to be accepted. So I would, spew ignorance about how, well, I'm not like, I'm not like that. I'm gay, but I'm not like that. And I think a lot of people, we don't talk about enough that a lot of people who, when they first come out, they go through that phase where they come out, but they don't want to be associated with the community. But we usually grow out of that. And then I didn't come out on social media until I think I was 18 or 19. And I remember making a video because it was just like a constant comment that I was getting. And honestly, like, I remember that was like such a hard time because it was the first time where I had really dealt with like a lot of hate at one time. Like, I had a lot of support, but like a lot of hate too, because, being in the martial arts community, there's not as much of a track record until recently with like some of the MMA fighters of like there being any kind of representation. Like, when I was trying to do this, I didn't see anybody like me. I didn't really have anyone who had a similar story who I felt I could look up to. So I decided to try to be that. But I was so young that like I hadn't even figured out my own identity. So there was just times where I remember like comments drove me to some inescapable thoughts. And but I mean, now at 24, now that I've been around a little bit more, now that I understand things, I've just kind of learned that the world isn't perfect. And while we should always fight to make it better, you may not be able to control everything around you, but you can create your own little world within the earth that we live on, filled with people who do understand you, who do love you. And you should spend more of your time working to create that world rather than to appease or beg for the acceptance of people who just simply don't.
Speaking on martial arts, could you tell me when your passion started and how you got into it?
So I got into martial arts when I was 7. I've always loved it. Like, when I was like, I mean, from the time I can remember, I was like obsessed with ninjas. So like I thought like being a ninja was like an actual career that like I could do. Like, I didn't really take into consideration that would mean like you like kill people.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to wear the mask and, run around. Like, I played fighting games growing up. So Mortal Kombat was something that I like obsessed over, and I wanted to be like that. And so when on Christmas, one year my aunt got me Taekwondo lessons, and that was supposed to be my quote like ninja lessons. And that's how I got started, and I've been doing it ever since. I'm 24 now. I've got about 16 years into it, and I love it more than I ever have.
How do you feel that you've been pursued by the martial arts community in general? Like, what has been the most challenging thing for you?
I think the most challenging thing is that it's like I'm pretty good at, communicating cordially, even with people I disagree with. Like, I had a video that blew up on YouTube about me talking to someone who's my dear friend who just doesn't, who at the time was not very accepting. And, but I think that it's kind of split, because there are the people who are just super accepting and who are really kind, and obviously those people are my supporters. But there's also just a lot of ignorance, and I think that's the most frustrating thing, is that I can't have a civil or intelligent debate or conversation with most people, because they're not even at a level where they've done the basic research to like debunk the simplest of things about the community and about anything. It's like, if you look at any of the science related to gender and sexuality, you would see that it is a completely natural thing that exists in, I mean, I know for homosexuality it exists in almost every species on the planet in some way. And so I don't, it's just the fact that like I don't mind educating people. I like educating people. I like when people ask me questions. But when it's at a place where it's like, I can't even speak to you because you haven't even like tried to understand, you want to be hateful rather than actually understand what the real truth is. It's frustrating that I can't even, like, that's just talking to a brick wall.
Yeah, sadly, that sometimes happens where we have to take a step back and evaluate if some of the people that exist in our lives are worth the effort.
Absolutely. And that was the hardest part, is because at a time, and honestly, I feel like it's just a recent lesson I learned, I thought everybody was worth the time. I was like, I will sit here and have this conversation with every single person, which of course is emotionally and mentally draining. And it also never really got me anywhere because, like I said, most of those people weren't interested in anything I had to say. They just wanted to be hateful. So I've just kind of learned that most people aren't worth the time, and that anybody who's actually willing to listen will approach you with, a good tone and, good intentions.
I was going to take the opportunity and ask you as well about donavanstojang.com and if you could elaborate on what kind of services you provide.
So yeah, I formed my company into 2020, but I launched my first course, I think in the end of October in 2019. And basically my goal was to just create a course, which is now my functional flexibility course, because that's kind of what I'm known for. And that's what I feel like there's so much either bad information about flexibility development, or it's so like, term based, where you have to know all these fancy terms in order to understand that most people don't. So my goal was really to take, all of my years of experience, all of my time studying and looking up those words, and basically to create a course that teaches you how to improve your flexibility as a martial artist, which also means, improving strength and balance and stability, because those all play a role, and to package it into one thing that basically is the answer, and it's broken down in a really easy to follow and understandable way. And launching that course, that was really scary because I had never released like a product like that before, where it was like, I put my heart and soul, and then like it was, a real product that I was about to sell. And so my friend had to convince me to even do it. So when I launched it, my first day I had 0 sales, but then like things started picking up, and now I have 3 courses, and I just recently launched online coaching calls where people can have like direct access from me if they want to ask questions, or if they need help with, flexibility or taekwondo or kicks, anything like that. And that's pretty much for the most part how I make my living.
That's absolutely amazing, and I'm very happy to know it's been a successful ambition of yours. I happen to know that you will also be starring in an indie movie filming this summer. Is there anything about that project that you can tell us about?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's called A Cup Full of Crazy. It's a thriller about a psychological thriller about mental health. And I'm really excited. The director, actually, who also created the film, she reached out to me, and she had followed me on social media, and she was like, hey, can I cast you as a small role in my movie? So it was just completely out of the blue. And my biggest goal this year was any opportunity in different aspects of my life that comes my way, I'm going to practice saying yes to, because I've always let imposter syndrome get the best of me. So I said yes. So in June, I'll be flying to Philadelphia to film. And yeah, I don't know when it's going to be released, but I know that I'll be filming in Philadelphia in the summer.
That sounds absolutely amazing. I'm really looking forward to that. Janae, as an experienced athlete, I'm curious to know if you might have any advice for Donovan going forward with his ambitions in life.
Just, like I would say, same kind of general recommendations I'd give anyone, but, believe in yourself, believe in your own abilities. And, yeah, the fact that you're practicing saying yes. I've actually had the opposite problem. I never know how to say no. But yeah, don't doubt yourself. Don't put a limit on your abilities. Dive headfirst into anything that interests you, and especially based on all the success you've had already, I'm sure you're going to do amazing. But just keep that faith in yourself. Even don't be afraid to step outside your comfort zone, and attack everything with enthusiasm and a positive attitude.
Thank you. And I just want to say, like, I'm a huge, huge fan of you, and I love what you do and what you stand for. I found out about you through that whole Blair situation, but I'm glad that that bad situation helped me find someone like you. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
While we are on the topic, do you think, Janae, that your personal achievements in competitive sports have protected you against extensive transphobia, or has it contributed into making things worse?
I think it's protected me in some ways, but then also made me a target in other ways. I think the fact that I had achieved a lot beforehand I had a lot of respect from a lot of people, especially within my own industry. And so I think there was more understanding because of that, because they respected me as a person and knew me. And so I think that lent to a lot of people, especially some of the bigger names in the sport and stuff like that. I guess granting me the benefit of the doubt and being more open to, what I was saying than if it was just somebody they had never heard of. That was much easier just to be like, that's a bunch of baloney. So people that knew me, I had a reputation for being an honest person who was very open. And I think the way I presented everything, people could tell it was heartfelt, and it wasn't, there was no other motive behind it. And this was something that was extremely personal and painful for me. And but at the same time, having that success, and especially in a sport that's considered very quote unquote macho, um, and having a lot of fans, that I guess the thing that's kind of ironic is that how I was known in the sport, not only as a champion and someone who was very successful, but also I was known as this total alpha male. I was someone who was very intense, extremely competitive. All these are traits which I would argue against this, but that society attributes to masculine qualities. And so I think because of that, a lot of my followers were these hyper masculine macho types, and a lot of them had a big problem with that, and I know there was a lot of backlash, because I received messages about people talking about things like burning posters I had signed for them and things like that. So there was definitely a lot of anger. So I think in some ways it worked for me, and in some ways it worked against me, because it just, what I represented to people, me coming out as trans, completely destroyed that idea. And I was accused of all kinds of things, from selling out and as if this was a great career move. As a world champion powerlifter,
Exactly.
let's pretend to be trans, because that's sure going to help my following. And in which I lost sponsors. I was immediately let go from some of my biggest sponsors, and obviously I lost a lot of my fan base. But I was also surprised at the amount of support I received, and how many people have continued to follow me and still support me. So that's really awesome. But I think that whole thing was kind of, me being me was like a double-edged sword.
Yeah, because I wanted to talk to you a little bit about this, the way we perceive ourselves and gender identity and fluidity between masculinity versus femininity. This is something that's actually a pretty complex thing for people to understand. How would you describe your identity as a trans woman and being non-binary as well?
Yeah, I think, I try to explain, and you get people that, even from within the trans community, like, well, you can't be trans and non-binary. They're two different things, and you can't also be gender fluid. But then I try to remind people, look, these are just words we've come up with to describe ourselves, and to, try to help other people understand who we are. They aren't definitive categories that everyone fits neatly into. And the reason I use multiple terms is because I think that's what describes me best. I mean, I am transgender. My core identity is female. There's no doubt about that. And many of the things I struggled with and continue to struggle with at times is this, when I talk to other trans women, it's very much, very relatable and very similar. But then also there is, I don't fit neatly in a box. My personality, all these personality tests and gender tests that I took early on when I was trying to figure myself out, I always scored hyper masculine and hyper feminine. So I definitely have aspects to my personality that society would define as masculine or extremely masculine. But I think that's a really nebulous argument, and it's a really fuzzy area, because the thing is, okay, so if masculine is man-like and feminine is woman-like, how do we even define that? For anything that you consider masculine, we can find women that embody that as well. Anything that we define as feminine, you can find men that embody that. So how is there really a masculine and feminine, in the black and white way that society likes to, try to present it? I don't think that really exists. I think people are extremely complex. I think there's aspects of femininity and masculinity as we would define them in almost everyone. And I think that you can have a lot of both traits. You can have very little of either trait. There's just, it's a broad spectrum, and it's extremely complex. And I think trying to make it as simple as, this is what men do, this is what women do, this is how they are, I think that's a, very mistaken and a very simplistic way to try to view a very complicated, human being. And yeah, I think that that's it's even really hard to even define those terms.
Yeah, because you clearly, what defines femininity and masculinity are social constructs in many regards. We just try to elaborate and find these words that would define us or make people understand us better. So there's nothing excludes the other.
Yeah, and how much of behavior is affected by social pressure. I mean, our society is obsessed with, the idea of masculinity and femininity, boy and girl. There's from the time you're born, you're treated differently. Now there's all these gender reveal parties as if that's the most important thing about that baby being born. It's gone so far. We even assign colors to masculine and feminine. It's absurd. And but yeah, people don't realize that children are getting cues from day one about what's acceptable for their gender. So we're never really allowed to grow and develop into who we are without having all these outside clues. I knew I was trans at 4 or 5 years old, and I already knew that it wasn't okay for me to tell anyone about this, and that I needed to hide all the parts about myself that would be perceived as feminine. That's at 4 or 5 years old, and it wasn't like somebody sat me down. It's just there's so many cues from day one, the way we're treated so differently, and it affects us all. So it's so hard to say what everyone would be like if there was none of these, rules and all this pressure on us from the time we're small children.
Could you maybe, and this is a question that goes out to the both of you, suppressing aspects of your identity, how would you describe the feeling? Donovan, I want to start with you.
It's something where when you're doing it, it feels as natural as breathing because you learn. But when you start to unlearn and breathe and figure out what it's like to actually exhale and look yourself in the mirror and identify with the person you're looking back at, you wonder how you ever in your life could suppress anything about yourself. And I think it's just a feeling of loneliness, a feeling of emptiness, and it's a feeling of constantly asking for acceptance from others. And that's something that I think you unlearn. It takes years and years and years to unlearn. I feel like I'm just now in a place where I'm starting to look at my life through my own view instead of seeing it from the eyes of literally every single person I could possibly come in contact with, and address my clothes and my hair and my speaking patterns and the way I walk to fit that narrative. I've been pretty open and free for a few years now, but there was still always that internal view of how is literally every single person seeing me, and just having that hyper focus. I think everyone to an extent is, worries about what people think, but it's like it becomes your whole life, just constantly wondering and looking at how people are perceiving you. I think a lot of people in the LGBTQIA plus community, they are hyper aware of body language, and they can see things about people that maybe most people can't, because we've had to depend on those cues for not, I don't want to sound dramatic, but it's not dramatic, for our survival, whether it's survival as in life or death, or survival in, making it in this world. We've had to be hyper focused on that to survive in the world we lived in, especially when you're young. So it's just this empty feeling, and while it may feel normal when you're doing it, you will wonder how you ever did it when you no longer have to anymore.
Would you like to elaborate on this, Janae? How was this experience for you?
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what Donovan just said. I think that was very accurate. But yeah, you grow up being hyper aware of everything that could potentially, for me, it could potentially out me. So I was hyper aware of, everything about gender and anything feminine. And it caused, and for me, and I think for a lot of LGBTQIA plus individuals, there's a lot of guilt and shame because we realize we're different and we're afraid to be out about that. And the world is slowly changing, and with social media, there's more of a sense of community, but it's still, in many places, it's very dangerous to be out. And if not even if not in a physical sense, which it is in a physical sense in many places, but it's still from a social perspective, there's a lot of backlash, and there's, even from within your own family and friends, you're afraid of losing people. For me, before I came out, I was absolutely terrified my entire life. I thought I would lose everyone. I thought I'd lose every single friend I had. I thought my family would reject me. And in some instances, I was right. But you're hyper aware of all these differences and anything about you that someone might recognize. Like I felt like there was potential for outing myself at any moment the entire time I was growing up. And it's a ton of stress. It's a huge burden. But like Donovan was saying, at the same time, you become so, it's just what you do. You're so practiced at it that you don't, you're not conscious of all the ways you're altering your own behavior because you've gotten so good at hiding in this way. For me, it was my place to hide was in the athletic world. I did love sports and I was super competitive. So that's where I could fit in and be perceived as quote unquote a typical boy. So that's where I hid and that was my safe place. And that's how I got through life, was by focusing on this one area that allowed me to exist and enjoy things in a way that wouldn't out me, and I wouldn't be singled out. But the entire time I grew up with this ton of shame and guilt, believing that there was something wrong with me and that it was sinful, and that if anyone ever found out, I was going to lose everything. So I think that's the same for a lot of people in our community. And like you said, you have this hyper awareness of all these things going on around you all the time because you have to. It becomes a necessity.
Yeah, I'm happy that regardless of these struggles, things are changing in the world, and we're seeing a clearer path in a lot of places in the world where people are actually starting to understand and realize the importance of being inclusive, accepting the different aspects of our individuality, and in regards to gender and sexuality. So I'm happy that you guys are sharing your stories. I'm so thankful to the both of you, and I admire you both greatly. The community needs role models like you two. Before we wrap up, Donovan, could you please tell our listeners on where they can find more information about you?
Yes. First off, thank you so much for your kindness and for having me on. My social media pretty much everywhere is at Donavan Barrett. I have TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. So you can find me on any of those platforms. And yeah.
Janae, would you like to share?
Yeah, I have my website, JanaeKroc.com, and that's Kroc with a K. It's KROC. And this on Instagram, Facebook, I'm Janae Marie Kroc, and Twitter's Janae Kroc. And yeah, you can find me in any of those places. And YouTube, I don't know if I mentioned YouTube as well, Janae Marie Kroc. But yeah, and Instagram and YouTube is where I share the most, the most information, and I appreciate every single follower I have and anyone who supports me. And thank you again so much for allowing me to share this with people in your audience.
Welcome back, everyone. We're going to move on to our next guest, Dave Marshall. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you, Matty. It's an absolute pleasure.
You are a professional wrestler and part of the Southern Hemisphere Wrestling Alliance. You're also an open gay man in a predominantly straight and hyper-masculine scene. So I wanted to start off by asking you how your family and social situation looked like growing up. What was it like growing up as a closeted gay boy in Western Australia?
So in terms of sexuality-wise, I grew up very much not really knowing where I fit in. That's where the hardest part, I think, kind of was. I grew up just liking people for kind of who they were, so I'd almost kind of grew up with a bisexual mentality. Obviously, with that side of things, like I'd never really dated a guy growing up through school because it was something that I didn't, you don't feel as acceptable, which is, I guess, our social situation. As you're growing up, you you almost feel like it's you're going to get in trouble for that. It's a wrong thing to do. But coming out into obviously my 20s, I made a choice to do something I hadn't done before, which was to move into dating guys. And yeah, it was just something that just felt right. So being predominantly in straight relationships for I'd say 12 years type thing, from high school through to 25. I was very fortunate in terms of my family side. They were all very supportive of the choices. Yeah, it was a quite a simple transition, which I'm really proud to be surrounded by the people I was.
Yeah, well, that's great. So your family was wholly supportive. during this period?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's always, I think that your dad's always one of the hardest people to tell. So my mum was completely fine. She was someone I actually spoke to years before, actually coming out as gay, just letting her know about some feelings and that. And she was super supportive and just gave me the advice that I needed to hear at the time. Um, and then when it did come to the time of actually stepping out, it took me an extra day to tell dad. So I actually went over to tell them both at the same time, and I just didn't have the guts to do it. So I had the discussion with mum. We had our little cry and moved on from that, and I just couldn't do the same with dad that day, so I had to come back the next day, and he was fine. He does what I think we were brought up to do, and that was kind of just make a joke, a light-hearted joke in the situation, and get on with the day.
How did the situation look like in regards to your friends? How was the coming out process in that regard?
So I was actually in a relationship with a female for, I think we were together for 7 years. So from 18 to 25, we were engaged. But there was just something that just never felt right in me, and it was something I started discussing with a few of my friends. I think this is, where my head's at and where I feel like I'm going. I still to this day remember a couple of friends going for walks with me and just kind of helping clear my head. So again, I had nothing but full support from, again, everybody. I have to say, in terms of coming out, I am so empathetic to other situations, because I personally had not had a road bump at all, from personal, family, friends, wrestling. No one's to my face said a bad word about it. Again, that's why I just feel like we're very, very fortunate in that side, where a lot of people aren't.
If we go and look at the wrestling part of your life, when did you start getting fascinated by wrestling? Would you say that was a childhood dream of yours?
Yeah, so the the wrestling obsession started when I was about 12. We got cable, and it was just one of the first things we kind of saw. I've gone back and tried to find that first episode I ever saw that like hooked me onto it. I haven't been able to get the exact one yet, but I just fell in love with what I've called stylized violence. It's performance, that, yeah, just it tells a story. But yeah, 12 was when I got interested into that. I didn't start wrestling until 25, when actually it did come out. It was something I always wanted to do, but I think growing up in watching the guys in the era that I grew up watching, a lot of the guys were just such iconic bodies to look at. Like, they were just huge men. There was not an ounce of fat on them. So my body mentality looking at them was like, I'm never going to be a wrestler. I grew up as quite a chubby kid, and it wasn't until 19 that I started really focusing on my body side and started actually getting into bodybuilding and all that. Then when I kind of started moving away from bodybuilding, and I came out and I went, well, look, I've already done one huge step in my life, which was walking away from a relationship and an engagement, digging at a childhood dream that I thought would never occur. Why not take a shot at it? And it was I spoke to a guy who wrestled at my gym. He gave me a name and number. We called up and got into training, and yeah, 6 years later, heavyweight champion.
That's an absolutely amazing transition, I have to say.
It's insane. It's part of, like, I stood up at year 7 graduation with a fake belt on my shoulder, saying that that's what I was going to be one day. The guy next to me was an astronaut, so I was like, how likely is this going to happen? And then bang.
That's
you
amazing.
couldn't tell him. You couldn't tell him what was going to happen.
So you would say that what attracted you to wrestling is partially the whole aspect of it getting to create like a superhero persona, and the training and physical aspect of it as well. Basically.
Yeah, absolutely. It's when you step in, like, you have so much creativity that you can do. Like, growing up watching He-Man, and I guess that was the main one, but like any superheroes kind of thing, like you want to be enthralled by the story, and that's what makes good wrestling. Like, having an outcome from something you've put so much effort into, and the story going well, and just the performance, and the physicality you can put into it all. Yeah, it just absolutely blew my mind. And yeah, I guess growing up, the wrestlers took the position of superheroes for me. And yeah, it was kind of like, it's something I've always watched, and even that period where I thought I'm never going to be in a ring, I'm never going to be big enough or fit enough, or it was still something that I just absolutely loved.
Yeah, how would you describe your wrestling persona?
So my wrestling persona is myself turned up to 12.
All right.
It's a case of taking what I think people would assume that I would be in terms of like, um, yeah, I think I almost stereotype myself. And so a lot of the time people will, what I'm intimidating as a
Yeah.
wrestler,
Yeah.
which is something I'm not as a person you would meet. And if you met me in the street, I'm the guy talking to anybody. Um, so when you put me in the ring, it's a case of I take what people would look at me and kind of automatically go, "That's who that guy is," and I make that real.
Yeah. Yeah.
If that makes sense at all.
Yeah, I think I understand what you mean about it, and it's
Yeah,
interesting.
it's like, being called into, it's like someone be like, "Oh, I wanted to come say hi to you, but I was intimidated." I'm like, I still don't see myself as intimidating, but that's where I grab that and go, right, I need to push that into a character and make people hate me for
Yeah.
this. So
Yeah.
I love being a bad guy in the wrestling. It makes things so much easier.
I mean, we all have this duality thing going on in life. There are some
Yeah.
situations where it's actually fun to be able to bring out your bad side.
Yes, and this gives me a very a positive outcome way to actually utilize that. Where like a lot of people have, yeah, but my anger issues go through the wrestling. It's a healthy outlet, if that makes sense. That I can
Yeah.
put all that negative energy and being, super cocky or whatever, I have to kind of like portray through that. I have an avenue to channel that.
Have you experienced any? And we've had this question going on for our previous guests as well. Have you experienced any homophobia within the wrestling scene?
Again, I personally have been really fortunate. I came out before I started wrestling. So when I actually did start there, they were all very aware of the situation. I've always the first one to crack a joke, so it's like I've never had anything negative from anyone that I have worked with or trained with, on that side. Normally because I can do as much, if not more, than most of the people there, so they can't be they can't be sitting there, "Oh, the gay guy's better than I am."
Yeah, yeah.
They don't want to admit it. So like I'm always the first one to crack the jokes, because it's I don't want people to be afraid to make lighthearted banter with me, so I'll be the first one to kind of crack that. And so if they did want to be homophobic, I did it before they did.
So, in regards to your wrestling career, could you describe a little bit on how it panned out throughout the years?
Yeah, so I started working with All Action Wrestling, which was down in the south parts of Perth. We do have four federations in WA, which again, growing up, you don't have any idea of if it's not like near your local settings, because I don't think the wrestling scene in WA was particularly big. So when we're getting to, even now, it's like good shows, you're pulling in 250 people. So the crowd, the it still isn't as big as it is over in like Melbourne or Sydney yet. But in terms of my side, I started working here with All Action Wrestling. It was who I trained with. I debuted as Marshall Davids. Very creative name to it all.
Interesting.
Before I started going by just Dave Marshall. But yeah, I wrestled through with them for about 2.5 years. Was two-time tag team champion there. And before I moved over to start doing some work with Schwa, I took about 6 months break, just getting some more training back in and getting back to where I felt I needed to be. And yeah, since I've been at the Southern Hemisphere Wrestling Alliance, again tag champion, won the mid-year Rumble, which put me through to be number one contendership for the heavyweight championship, which I won in December of 2019. And again, because we've unfortunately lacked some shows over the last year and a half, I haven't really been able to be present to defend the belt. But we're starting to open up now. We had our first show back 2 weeks ago, so looking forward to hopefully again pushing through this year in at least Australia, trying to get a national show done towards the end of the year if everything starts to normalize again. And try and move into 2022 to do at least and possibly a couple of international shows. So US and Europe, or US and Japan if I can.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, and if I feel like I've wrestled on at least a couple of continents. I can feel if I get to mid to late 30s and go, cool, I've wrestled across the world. I'm happy. I can hang up the boots and and walk away from it still with an able body.
Yeah. So this is your general aspirations going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. That along with the Twitch channel side of things, and just keeping on content creation. Yeah, just really trying to push to, yeah, work for ourselves.
Yeah, because I wanted to talk a little bit about that as well. Because besides your wrestling career, you've also become a content creator online. You have an OnlyFans, and you're a streamer on Twitch as well, streaming video game content a couple of times a week. What has that community meant to you, and what made you start streaming?
I started streaming to begin with. I watch some content creators on YouTube and that, where they were originally from Twitch, and it was a world that I've always been just obsessed with video games. I don't think there's been a part of my life that I haven't had video games to escape to. So when I found the community on Twitch and I started meeting all these other content creators who just loved the same things as I did, I guess growing up in a more sports orientated, very, I don't want to stereotype things, but very heterosexual teenage upbringing. A lot of the games that I really did enjoy weren't cool, so I never had people to share those with. Like, even 1990s strategy games and things. I'm like, I just love them, and to have a community that just love to hang out and just with this really amazing positive vibe where you can spend 4 to 5 hours and just kind of with a smile on your face. And yeah, it's just, the support's been absolutely amazing. But I guess, yeah, the love for video games and being able to create a pretty amazing community that's just people can meet other people similar to them, or at least with similar interests. And yeah, it's been a crazy journey over the last year and a half.
Yeah, I've noticed how your Twitch channel has been exploding over these past few months, and it's been really interesting to see that journey for you, and how embraced you are by your own community, and what a great community you've created. Do you have a favorite game?
Favorite game of all time, I guess, as a
Yeah,
series would have to be Pokemon. I remember picking up Pokemon in like '96 and not even knowing what it was, and then like 6 months later, the cartoon came out of. I'm like, oh my god, that's that game that I love. And I guess I haven't missed a beat with Pokemon. It's something I've always played whenever they've released something. So even if it's not like the top memory, it's got to be the most played game I've ever had. So I have to say Pokemon.
yeah. So in general, what are your future ambitions with the Twitch channel? What do you want to accomplish?
Look, I guess the next step for as standard for Twitch streamers is normally getting to partner. I don't think it's something I'm too focused on, because I'm really wanting to probably funnel more towards YouTube stuff, because I enjoy kind of like just getting the fun clips of certain streams, putting them together just to have again compact 5 hours worth into like a 20-minute video that you can kind of just sit down, enjoy, and know there's another one coming tomorrow. So Twitch is still going to be the main platform that we're going to be working on. But stepping into YouTube and kind of the Twitch partnership are kind of like the next steps that we're working towards. But we've got our first merch release this year, and some other really fun stuff kind of happening. So it's just, yeah, it's just taking the steps as we're able to, if that makes sense. Because along with the Twitch channel and the OnlyFans, we also run a beard oil company, which is just going through a rebrand at the moment. So that's going to be taking up a good chunk of the second half of the year, getting reestablished and getting into some suppliers with that as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about something more personal. You've engaged yourself in topics like mental health and supported charities like Beyond Blue, which is an Australian organization working on reducing the impact of depression, anxiety, and suicide, and create support programs for people with mental health struggles. Why is this such an important cause for you?
Look, we all have our own struggles. That's very clear. The first kind of exposure to severe mental health was my father took his life in 2017. Um, Again, came completely out of nowhere. It was just it was not an expected thing, and unfortunately, it's a case of where the mental health side started. And I guess it kind of comes back to the upbringing, and when I kind of went through my coming out process, keeping empathetic towards other people is super important, especially with, I guess, the mental health. Sorry, I took a step back for a sec. But yeah, I guess it's just understanding that everyone has their own struggles, big or small. It affects everyone so differently, and just empathetic to people to allow others to have their own space and time. So again, moving forward with like the charities that we've worked with, yeah, that's been a super important thing for us because it's something that you can't ever see. It's been it is a subject that does throw me off that little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just a case that I just feel everyone has their own struggles, and that bit of support, because again, I'm not a psychologist at all, and I run a very positive platform, and being able to support charities that are there to help people is again super important to me, because it's something I can't help with. But as much as I can provide a platform for people to enjoy, I try to not have too much trauma crossover where we discuss too much of that on the Twitch channels. Because again, it's not my place. I'm not a professional. That's why we donate through to the mental health charities. But again, it all kind of started with Dad's side, and I guess everyone through COVID has had some form of mental health struggle. So now of all the years is really important to really look after yourself.
Growing up, did you experience any mental health issues and struggles that were hard for you? Were there periods in your life growing up that was stressful when it comes to your mental state?
I think that the hardest time was before I actually did come out, being in a relationship with someone that you've from such a young age was a big part of your life, and you've loved, from the relationship pressures to even the financial pressures of having a mortgage on top of that, with trying to take to yourself of like, do I move forward to be happy, or do I make the other person happy and keep life simple? That was probably, to me, the hardest point mentally. I look back at it now and I see that there was definitely some depression symptoms and whatnot, but it's a case that we are able to move forward, and with the support of, again, friends and again, a lot of loved ones reassuring me that it wouldn't change, like nothing would change. We got through that. So I guess myself, that would be the probably been the hardest point. Again, but what the positives that have come out of that are huge. Like I wouldn't have, in that position, I wouldn't have been able to quit my job in finance to go be a personal trainer, which is a job I wanted to do for years. From that, I became a professional wrestler, which, like I said, was a dream. It was a pipe dream. I never expected to actually do it. And it was just like that day of coming out was like a literal release for me. And it's what I refer to as now my birthday, because it's like that's when I became Dave Marshall.
What was the point where you realized that I can't stay in this anymore because it's destructive to my own well-being?
I think it was just thinking more and more into the future of, if I stay in this, I'm going to end up being a 40 to 50-year-old guy with kids, with grandparents of those kids, with a wife, and possibly almost paid off mortgage to go, this isn't what I want, or this isn't exactly what, this isn't what made me happy. And it was going to be a roll of the dice of could it have not. And I went for the shorter term thing of, look, I've got to check for myself rather than waiting out in the 18, 20 years and seeing what happens. So it was kind of like, do something or don't, and I decided to do something. And it was like one of the hardest things I have ever done.
Yeah. A general question: what does make you happy?
Making other people laugh. It's a very simple thing, and I realized this not long ago, and it was when I watched back one of my streams, I remember catching, I think it was 30 Rock, and they made a comment that they had something like 7 jokes per minute was their average. And
Yeah.
I'm like, that's what I want to be. And seeing back in a stream, and I swing for it. I might not hit every joke, but I will try and get someone to giggle almost once every 15 seconds. And it's just what makes me happy. It's just, yeah, even at the pools a couple of days ago, we were talking to one of the instructors, and I just had to make a joke at it and walk away, just because I don't know, it's a smiles or euphoric. It sounds very cliche, but it is. It's just anyone who spends any time with me just know I just can't not like make a joke on something. You know, I can be having the most serious serious conversation in the world, and I'll slip something in there to get a smile. Like it's so that's definitely something for me, and I'm gleaming with happiness right now, because it's just like that realization is a nice one.
Yeah, so we have a future comedian on our hands, basically.
Although not a successful one, but we'll keep trying.
I was thinking, going back to the whole aspect with OnlyFans, you are currently in a relationship. How does that work for you? Because that's a pretty controversial discussion sometimes to have.
Yeah. So the OnlyFans kind of started up. I guess it was more of a supply demand thing. People were messaging me on Instagrams and asking for that content. And at the time, I was in a relationship, and I just kind of said, well, no, that's I'm not sending pictures out for I'm in a relationship. And I guess it was just being comfortable with my partner, and it was the case. We don't have issues with other people seeing our bodies. And that's something just over time we've become comfortable with. And one morning I woke up and kind of thought, I'm gonna start OnlyFans and do something good with it. To this day, we've donated just over $50,000 of the profits to charities worldwide, from Australia to Canada to the US. And that was kind of the starting point for us in terms of holding a relationship through the OnlyFans. It's a case of we do things on there together. It's mostly me by myself, but there are a handful of videos of us, and it's just a case of the people, unfortunately, have been pretty respectful. I haven't had many people that I don't think I've actually banned a single person from my OnlyFans, so I've been super fortunate there. But no, people have been super respectful and understanding that, I am in a relationship. I have no issues with you enjoying the content that I provide for you, and you're more than welcome to tell me that. But in terms of me getting involved, flirting and things, people have always been very appreciative of the situation I'm in. So again, I've been very fortunate there.
That's a great thing that you've been able to maintain that respect with the people who consume your content, basically.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's not, and yeah, the fact of them being so respectful. Like I've had I've had easier transactions selling a pair of underwear than I have sometimes going to get something of milk. I've had people be kinder there than I have a cashier sometimes.
Yeah.
So it's it can shock you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was gonna ask you, what would you say to someone young within the LGBTQ plus community who maybe shares your passion but is too scared to pursue it because of the fear of receiving backlash or hate?
A lot of the wrestling schools, Australia-wise anyway, I think, again, you're always going to have some areas that unfortunately are going to be heavily not, I don't want to say homophobic, but you're always you can't have everyone be kind. So it's finding a school that do have good policies in place. In Perth, the EPW School of Professional Wrestling has like solid discriminatory things in all their contracts that are signed off before anyone starts to train. So a lot of the schools nowadays will be very protective of people and make sure things like that don't happen, because it's a sport where the LGBT community is growing in professional wrestling. There are more stars on AEW, on WWE in the big headlines that are having more LGBT wrestlers in there, so it is becoming more popular. But yes, it's a case of go down and starting, and if, just like anything, if you're going to have someone in that community that isn't supportive of you or acts that way, there's going to be another wrestling school that will, like, and that's on them to not be progressive.
Is there someone in the wrestling scene that you idolize?
My first love was always The Rock. not in a sexual way. It's because that's a big thing as well. A lot of people do cross over the wrestling and sex, and to me there's a huge barrier between the two. I am a gay wrestler, but it doesn't mean that again has that crossover, because I know there's a big kink in wrestling. But yeah, like The Rock for me was just someone who just had always idolized, and I guess even after his wrestling I've idolized even more from everything he's been able to do. And again, a very good mindset and attitude that I can still idolize now. So I think I made the right choice.
Well, I have to say there are so many aspects of you that I admire, and certainly what you've been through, but also how you've never wavered from achieving your personal goals. And I think for people to hear your story like this, it's gonna have a huge impact. So,
my friend, thank you.
I want to thank you so much for doing this with me. Before we wrap up, can you please tell our listeners on where they can find more information about you?
Yeah, absolutely. I am on Instagram and Twitter as Dave Marshall 89, and on twitch.tv/Guerrilla Gaming, spelled GAYMAING. Yeah, that will be the best kind of ways to ever get in touch or to see more. Or again, the Twitch for me is a very open, positive space. If it's ever something you want to just kind of hang out, and even if you don't chat, just if you can enjoy the content, that makes me incredibly happy. So yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Great. All right. Thank you so much, my friend.
No, it's a pleasure. Thank you, Matty.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for listening. If you want to find more information about the podcast and future episodes, you can find more information at Queer as Pop on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, where we have a pre-launch of each episode before it's available on all of your favorite podcast platforms. New episodes are out on Fridays, and if you want to leave a comment, thought, or a question to our guests, you can do so by going to speakpipe.com/queeraspop_ and leave a voice message either on your computer or your phone. Until next time, take care.